So, as Satu mentioned, I'm Anna, and I would like to talk to you about my and my peers' experiences as a patient. There are no conflicts of interest. It's worthwhile to mention that this presentation will be unscientific and anecdotal. As many of you here in the room, I have spent much of my adult life building my CV, which consists of education and professional experiences. My background is in business and engineering, so quite different from much of this conference. My CV also includes volunteering experiences. I've been active in the Finnish Infertility Association, and I'm also a trained expert by experience in the women's clinic at the hospital in Helsinki. So that's the official CV. However, over the past decade, behind the scenes, I have spent over 90% of my thoughts and my energy on building a completely different CV. This is more of a secret CV, one that rarely one wants to display in public, that one rarely wants to discuss. And although no recruiter ever asks for this CV, the context of building this CV is where, for me, the key challenges and the key learnings have taken place. And therefore, I wanted to share with you now the key learnings from my CV of trying to have a baby. Specifically, the 4 areas I'd like to discuss include the power structures between patients and professionals, encounters between patients, emotions, and finally, a pondering over the big question of whether the ability to do all these treatments is a curse or a blessing. This might sound like a provocative question. The industry is there to help us realize our dreams and to have babies, so it's easy to see why it would be a blessing. But at the same time, the treatments are extremely challenging, emotionally, physically, even philosophically, to the point that we lose ourselves in the process. Our spouses start thinking and even saying that we have gone crazy. We lose touch with our best friends. We can reach a point where nothing else matters in life. Hence, I do think that this question merits some time to think about. Some time ago, I was at the hospital receiving treatment from a doctor. She was very competent, very professional, and I knew that I was in good hands. At the same time, I was feeling very vulnerable and very scared. And after I came home, I did something that I usually don't do, but now I did, which is that I checked her out on LinkedIn and on Facebook. And given that my view of her was based on that encounter at the clinic, and my view of her was as someone extremely professional and highly senior, I was astonished to discover that we are approximately the same age, that we have some friends in common, that we even did our dissertations at approximately the same time. Hence, if we had met in a different context, we might have been like this. But because we met in that healthcare professional versus patient setting, the encounter felt to me instead like this. Outside the clinic, many of us patients might be very cool and confident, but when we enter the clinic, we also enter a very strong predefined role, and in that role, we can feel very defenseless. One of the things contributing to that defenselessness is the large information asymmetry between patients and healthcare professionals. The professionals hold the expertise, the decision power over a lot about our treatments. The professionals even hold the power to decide what information to share and not to share with us. And often we don't dare to ask much. Honestly, we often know so little that we don't even know what we would ask. Once, at the public clinic, I gathered up the courage and I asked the doctor why she had chosen that specific protocol and those specific medicines for me for that round. And she answered, "You don't need to think about that. We have decided those in our doctor's meetings and you don't need to worry about it." So I went quiet. I was kind of feeling embarrassed about having asked such a question. It was only years later, in a different context, that I was given a presentation about the guidelines and principles of that same hospital. And they stated, and I quote, "As a patient, you are entitled by law to participate in decisions on treatment." I was astonished to read that over all my IVF treatments, it had never occurred to me that I would have such a right. Rather, I have been thinking that if a doctor has engaged with me in a discussion over different options, different medicines, they were just being extra nice. So, for many reasons, we stay quiet at the clinic. The doctor might even ask us if we have any questions, and we may still say no. But that doesn't mean that we don't have any questions. Usually in our minds there are 1,000 questions. Why was I given these medicines? What do those words mean that she's using? I wonder if I can have a beer in the sauna tonight? And how abnormal am I? We just don't ask. And then what happens is that people come to our peer discussion fora, both online and live, and people ask questions, many of them relevant, of course, but many of them are so absurdly simple that it really reflects that people haven't understood much at the clinic. And some of them are so individual to the person in question that they really should be answered by healthcare professionals and not by peers. And it's unfortunate that professionals often have such limited visibility into what we are thinking and feeling, because better visibility might result in more informed decision-making about our treatments and in more humane treatment. To illustrate, when I was going into my 4th IVF at the public side, the doctor was being curt, as usual. She told me to get undressed. I looked around. I couldn't see a curtain behind which to undress, and I didn't know where I would put my clothes. And because this was the last treatment that the public side was going to offer me, I had very little to lose. So I didn't open my buttons, I opened my mouth. And I said that she had not even looked at me when I had entered the room, that she had not told me her name. I told her that I was a person just like her, that I'm smart like her, that I have friends, and that I have 2 cats at home. And then the unexpected happened. She took off her glasses, she looked at me, and she said, "Have I not introduced myself? That's odd." And that small act of courage from my part fully changed the experience of that treatment for me. Later on, when I was going in for the puncture, and the nurse was putting in the cannula, she asked me how my cats were doing. And I said they're doing good. And that small moment, that small dialogue, is one of the most memorable experiences from my whole treatment path. Then there's one thing I want to highlight about encounters between patients. Peer support is extremely important. The moments when we finally gather up the courage to go and talk to people who have faced or who are facing similar situations, they can be life-changing. So please make sure that you know your relevant associations in your country, and please make sure that every single patient knows how to access peer support. Thank you. The thing about peer support is that we want to choose the moment and the setting when we engage in peer support. And those moments are not at the clinic. When we come to the clinic, we are in the role of a patient. So when we are in the waiting room, or when we're lying in bed pre or post-treatment, we are rarely in the mindset for bonding. This is something I want to emphasize because in a few instances I have observed a mismatch between what patients think and what professionals think that patients think. Even though our situations might appear similar in the grand scheme, we have such a multitude of situations. There are the miscarriages and the like, but it can even feel devastating to hear that the patient in the bed adjacent to yours got 9 eggs when you only got 4 eggs. To illustrate, I was once at the clinic with my husband, and we walked past one of the nurses' rooms, and we happened to see the back of his friend there getting advice on how to inject herself. We looked at each other and we panicked. What do we do? So we quickly went to the elevator and we exited the clinic. And we stayed outside the glass doors of the clinic, talking, and after a few minutes we saw that friend of his approaching. And we panicked again. What do we do? She's approaching. And then just when she was reaching the door, she also saw us and she made a U-turn and went back to the clinic. If it had been a different context, we would have hugged each other and gone for coffee together. But in that setting, we want privacy. Therefore, in my view, one of the responsibilities of the professional is to also protect us patients from each other to the extent possible. Then my key learnings about emotions. Quite at the beginning of my CV journey, we were at the clinic and the doctor told me that we would not be able to do the planned insemination because of the weekend. And I said, okay, and I looked like this. This is how we often look. But this is how I really felt, extremely disappointed and extremely angry. It's hard to explain why. It's just one insemination, it's just 1 month. The chances weren't that high to begin with. But when we are in those treatments, it's extremely emotional. And what you see on the surface from our faces is only one small fraction of those emotions. So there are the usual fear, sorrow, and anger. But then there are all those emotions that we don't even know we have because we don't have the means to reflect. We get so immersed in the execution and implementation of the treatments, the clock may be ticking, that we're hindered from connecting with our inner selves. And then we fail to recognize the deeper questions stemming from our hearts, such as, does going ahead with this treatment really match my values? Do I really want to do this treatment, or am I just afraid, perhaps rightfully so, that my spouse will leave me otherwise? Or am I afraid that my parents will be disappointed? What other options do I have than the ones that the doctor is telling me for having children or for leading my life? From the doctor's perspective and from the professional's perspective, this is a lot about protocols, processes, medicines, probabilities, and that's the way it should be, of course. But for us patients, these are fundamental questions about humanity, existence, and the purpose of our lives. Here are some interesting pictures that one very competent and very kind biologist called Päivi shared with me. The questions that might arise from looking at these pictures include, for example, what solution she was using on the Petri dish, or what the PGS results might show, or all of the more elaborate questions that you hear being addressed, for example, at this conference. And that's how, again, professionals should be thinking. These are the questions that you need to address in order to maximize the probability of pregnancy and the probability of live birth. You might even see something funny in this. I saw a poster in the hallway stating, "I'm having a blast at ESHRE." But at the same time, for me, as a patient, this is my baby. This was my baby, fragmenting away. And thus comes the big question, is the ability, is the privilege to do all these treatments a curse or a blessing? The industry is there, often, to help us realize our dreams, but at the same time, often to make money from those dreams. I'm usually careful with money. When I go to the supermarket, I choose carefully between the different tomatoes, and I choose the most affordable tomatoes. If even those are too expensive, I don't choose any tomatoes at all. But if there's the slightest chance of succeeding with the next treatment, then bring on the fan, and I'm ready to blow it all away. And this price tag is there usually, regardless of whether there is a baby in the end or not. We have many people in our peer groups sharing their stories of how they ended up childless and how they're still paying back the bills for even years to come. There's such a multitude of options available that it can be difficult to know when to stop. And it's hard to tell when hope has been replaced by desperation. There's always a new something. There's always a new treatment, a new alternative treatment, a new protocol, a new test, a new check, a new dietary supplement. So we may continue and continue and continue to the point of exhaustion, to the point that we're mere shells of the person we used to be, fully consumed, squeezed out rags. And reaching that point does not necessarily require 5 IVFs or 10 IVFs. Reaching that point is individual for every single person. The money holes are hopefully eventually filled, and the scars on the tummy eventually fade. But the emotional scars can last long. And again, those scars can stay regardless of whether there's a baby in the end or not. And those scars can also affect our subsequent use of healthcare services. I didn't used to mind going to the doctor or going for a blood test, but now I do. One can start trembling at the thought of a routine checkup or hyperventilating at the thought of a vaccination. Lately, we have had people in our peer groups sharing how their traumas have been triggered by corona test. When I did a negative corona test, I started crying, and I ran under a bright lamp, desperately looking for that second line. And of course, our experiences from previous treatments can also affect our willingness to keep trying for a baby or our willingness to keep trying for more babies. And here, the patient-facing professionals have a lot of power to mitigate those negative effects of the treatments. With power comes responsibility. And ultimately, the professionals have a strong role in contributing to determining whether the IVF industry becomes a curse or a blessing for each of us patients. The professionals make a lasting mark on us patients, but you also make a lasting mark on the potential children. If there is, in the end, a child, the professionals, the clinic, the lab involved become an integral part of the story, of the identity building of that child. So, therefore, to make it a blessing, we ask that, please, talk to us realistically about our chances, hopefully in an individualized manner. Talk to us about different options, the medical and the non-medical ones, also the ones that don't involve a child or continuing the treatments. Please talk to us in a way that respects our intellect, at the same time bearing in mind that we are rarely subject matter experts. Please be mindful with our money. These are very large sums, very many tomatoes for many of us. And please, please treat us as equal human beings. Look us in the eye. Tell us your names. Treat us with empathy, and also make sure we are able to access peer support. And finally, please ask for our questions and address our questions. If we don't ask much, if possible, please also think about the questions that we should have asked, and also address those. And these, please, apply regardless of the length of our CVs, the length of our journeys. And this might seem like a lot, but it's not. I know, because I have encountered many such professionals during my CV journey. And when we are treated responsibly in such a manner, the privilege to receive treatments can truly become a blessing. It might not lead to a baby, which sucks. But even then, one will know that one has done what one's body, heart, and mind were willing and able to do at the time. Or it might lead to a baby or babies. In my case, we now have many small hands to pet the cats. So, from the bottom of my heart, thank you.